Good afternoon. I'm Ian Lesser from GMF here in Brussels, and on behalf of GMF, it's really a great pleasure to welcome all of you this afternoon, joining us for this public event, actually closing out a week of different sessions, all around our Mediterranean Strategy Group, actually the 21st edition of our Mediterranean Strategy Group, which is being held this week. Broadly on the theme of China's strategic investments in the Mediterranean, but also talking about a lot of other issues that relate to that subject. And today we have, a great pleasure of hosting a conversation on the 3+1 initiative, bringing together Greece and Cyprus and Israel with the United States in the Eastern Mediterranean for cooperation around a set of issues which I'm sure we're going to discuss, but embrace economic cooperation, development, stability. But we'll hear more about that. We're really pleased to be able to talk about this in the context of, a set of concerns about increasing great power competition around the Mediterranean. We'll discuss that, I'm sure, but also in the context of what transatlantic partners can do to face critical challenges in the region looking ahead. And that's really not surprisingly for GMF, that's really the focus of our work on the Mediterranean, is to take in turn over the years a set of critical issues and discuss them, but also to treat these in terms of transatlantic strategy and transatlantic interests. And we're very happy to be able to do that here today. We've got a great group of speakers with us today, and we're very grateful to them for joining us. And let me just tell you who they are briefly. We also have a wonderful moderator I will introduce as well. We have with us, we're very pleased today to have Ambassador Geoffrey Pyatt, the US Ambassador to Greece, Ambassador Marios Lysiotis, the Cypriot Ambassador in Washington, Thanos Dokos, National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister of Greece, and Shimon Stein, Ambassador Shimon Stein, a Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, but also a former Israeli ambassador to Germany, and he's actually coming to us from Berlin, I believe, today. So we're delighted to have them all with us. And we're very pleased to have with us as moderator, Alexia Tasouli, who's diplomatic correspondent for the Open TV. It will be a fantastic conversation, and we really mean it as a conversation. And I'll turn it over to Alexia in a moment to get us started. But let me, before I do that, just say a word of thanks at the outset to our partners in the Mediterranean Strategy Group and to this event today, to the Compagnia di San Paolo, the Luso-American Development Foundation, the Policy Center for the New South, and very importantly today, the Phelon Fund for Transatlantic Partnership. Delighted to have them all as supporters of this work, and maybe allow me a special thanks to the US Embassy in Greece for their help in putting all of this together, and their support, and also to the Delphi Economic Forum. We were hoping to do this in Athens, sort of in the context of Delphi, but we'll do that when we can do it in person, hopefully next year. So that's, from my side, my thanks and my welcome. And I'm now very pleased to turn it over to Alexia to moderate our conversation. So over to you.
Lesser, it's a very honor that I'm going to participate in the well-known and very highly respected the German Marshall Fund event of the United States. Thank you very much for your introductory remarks, and I hope in the end you have some time to make a conclusion of this interesting, I hope, conversation. I would like to welcome our distinguished guest, Mr. Geoffrey Pyatt, who is the US Ambassador to Greece. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Marios Lysiotis, Cypriot Ambassador to the United States, Mr. Thanos Dokos, National Security Advisor, and Mr. Shimon Stein, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of National Security Studies and former Israeli Ambassador to Germany, who is currently in Berlin right now. I'm happy that I have been informed that there is a wide number of registration for this session. So I'm hoping that we're going to have a lot of questions from the audience in order to ask our distinguished guests. The title of this event is called the 3+1 Initiative Amidst Great Power Competition. And allow me now to start addressing the same question to all of you. Since the joint declaration was signed between Cyprus, Greece, Israel, and the United States, of course, in March 29th, affirming the four countries' shared commitment to promoting peace, stability, security, and prosperity in the Eastern Mediterranean region. I would like first to ask Mr. Dokos, who is coming from Greece, and he's the host country at the moment. Mr. Dokos, how's Greece? The Greek government what does it mean for Greece, this agreement, and why does it matter?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank Ian Lesser and GMF for the invitation. Participating in those events is always intellectually challenging and quite pleasant when they take place in a physical format, but these are different times. Since I'm the first to try to answer that question, if I may very briefly remind our audience how it all started and why. And one has to go back to 2010. And if I had to put it in a couple of sentences, it was about ruptured relationships for Israel, need for friends in Washington for Greece, and search for energy partners for Cyprus. Prime Ministers Papandreou and Netanyahu met by chance in a restaurant in Moscow in July 2010. Then Papandreou visited Israel, being the first Greek prime minister to do that, and then from there it's all history. Israel, 2009, we had the now infamous Davos incident between Prime Minister Erdogan and President Perez, and then 2010, briefly before the Papandreou-Netanyahu meeting, the Mavi Marmara incident. It was becoming clear to Israel, I think, that the AKP government was not to be trusted, and Israel needed strategic airspace for exercises and links with Europe, and Greece and Cyprus could provide that. Now, Greece, being at the early stages of a very deep economic crisis, needed support in Washington, the Jewish lobby, and New York, Jewish business people, and then moving Israel away from Turkey and closer to Greece strategically was an added bonus. And Cyprus needed partners for energy exploration. It was already enjoying a very good relationship with Israel. At the end of 2010, it signed a exclusive economic zone delimitation agreement, and Cyprus was happy to jump on board. Now, if in the early stages of that relationship, the common threat of concern and threat from Turkey was an important element because of the latter's of Turkey's aggressive rhetoric and behavior, it was soon complemented, and I would say overshadowed by common interest as the basis of for cooperation. And the four countries, we have these two parallel partnerships: Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, Greece, Cyprus, and Egypt. And then the US was added. Those countries have invested over the years on common interest and have promoted their cooperation on defense, security, energy, trade, culture, and various other sectors. And if there is an underlying theme and a shared description of those initiatives, is that there is an axis of stability in the Eastern Mediterranean. And this, I think, is also the main reason, but Ambassador Pyatt will tell us about this, that the US decided to join the initiative. What has been the reaction of other powers? Well, the likes of Russia and China as an emerging actor in the region have not reacted in those initiatives, at least not in a negative manner. Other regional players like United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Jordan have expressed their interest, and now they are involved in similar cooperation schemes, perhaps not as deep as the initial ones, but I think there's a lot of potential. And given the almost complete lack of a regional security architecture in a region with multiple hotspots and flashpoints, the ambitious goal is to create an arc of stability extending from the Balkans to the Eastern Med and all the way to the Gulf and the Indian Ocean. And this should be an open architecture, provided that interested new members share the objectives of stability and peaceful resolution of disputes, and of course, abide by a non-aggressive code of conduct. So I think a very beneficial, mutually beneficial arrangement for all four participants with a lot of potential for the future.
Yes, you're right. For us, for the Greeks, this initiative has drawn a lot of attention because, as you said, as the Prime Minister has said, the aim is for Greece to be a country of calm, of stability force, and therefore we're committed to strong cooperations. And as you said, we need friends, and as we need friends, we need United States. And therefore, I'm moving on to U.S. Ambassador, Mr. Geoffrey Pyatt, who is following closely these developments in Eastern Mediterranean. And I would like to ask Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Pyatt, what does this 3+1 Greece agreement means for United States? Why does it matter to United States, Eastern Mediterranean?
Thank you, Alexia. And first of all, I mean, it's a huge honor to be with this group of folks who I respect so much, thinking through some of these issues. And the embassy has been really proud of our partnership with the German Marshall Fund on all of this. I think the short answer to your question rests in geography. The Eastern Mediterranean is a global crossroads between Europe, Africa, and Eurasia. It's a crossroads where we see an increasingly assertive role by potentially dangerous actors like Russia, which is obviously asserting its presence in Libya through the Wagner mercenaries, in Syria, and in the Aegean and the Black Sea region following the illegal occupation of Crimea and the expansion of Russia's military footprint there. Ambassador Burns, in the excellent presentation he made to the GMF group on Tuesday, noted the increasing focus within NATO on how to reinforce our alliance's southeastern flank. But I think there's also, on top of that now, an additional effort to think more systematically about this strategic space that brings together American equities, not only in Europe, but also in the Middle East and in Northern Africa. So we've made a big bet on the 3+1 initiative. We're also obviously thinking very closely about the role that China is playing in this region, in particular China's efforts to exert control over trade and transportation routes across Eurasia through the Belt and Road Initiative, including in the Eastern Mediterranean, in Israel, here in Greece through the port of Piraeus, in Italy, and beyond. So we look to the 3+1 initiative as an opportunity to work with three democracies that enjoy a close and dynamic relationship with the United States. Thanos also mentioned the emergence of these other constellations of cooperation, including with Egypt, with Lebanon, which I think are quite interesting and important. But I think what I would emphasize is that for all of our governments, this architecture of cooperation did not happen organically. It is a result of strategic choices that each of our governments have made. And in the case of the United States, the initiative to expand this cooperation to create the 3+1 emerged from the previous Greek government, from Syriza. And it was the decision of Secretary Pompeo to accept in 2019 the Greek government's invitation for him to join the March 2019 meeting at the leaders level of the 3+1. But also in parallel, you had important bipartisan developments in the United States. I would place particular attention on Senator Menendez's leadership with Senator Rubio of in advancing the East Med Act, which was passed through both houses of Congress on a bipartisan basis and was signed into law by President Trump in December 2019. Significantly, this bipartisan support has carried over through our presidential transition. There is no change in the Biden-Harris administration's strong support for the 3+1 process. Secretary of State Blinken underlined that in his February 15th phone call with Foreign Minister Dendias. And I think it was even noted in the press readout that we seek to continue our joint cooperation in this format. We continue to work, especially in the energy area, but also moving into areas like technology, like counterterrorism, like economic recovery. And I'm very pleased also to see now how that cooperation is moving into the area of renewables and renewable energy cooperation, which is a critical priority for my president and my government, and an area where there's obviously synergy between all four of our countries. So we're going to continue to invest in this. We believe that the energy cooperation example and the progress that we've achieved there points towards the other areas where we can demonstrate progress. And I would conclude, you alluded, and Thanos alluded briefly to Turkey. I would just emphasize for the United States, this is not about in any way excluding Turkey. It's rather about creating a positive dynamic and a dynamic of economic prosperity, shared values, and opportunity in a region that we see as particularly important to U.S. strategic interests.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Of course, we all agree here that this strong cooperation, which United States play a crucial role, wouldn't have happened without your participation, the United States participation. And of course, no one country is excluded. Even Turkey is welcome to participate, as far as the Greek government has said, to respect the international law, as the United States also have said to respect the international law. Now moving on to Cyprus, to Mr. Marios Lysiotis, the Cyprus ambassador to the United States. Of course, Cyprus is in the center, an island in the center of the Eastern Mediterranean. So how important is, Mr. Ambassador, the Cyprus, this cooperation, this initiative? And also you heard about Lebanon and Egypt. What does this cooperation with these two countries also mean for Cyprus government?
Yes, thank you very much, Alexia, and thank you also, Ian Lesser and the German Marshall Fund for giving me this opportunity to join such distinguished panel on an issue which is of extreme significance to Cyprus. Mr. Dokos and Ambassador Pyatt brought forward both some elements of the context within which this cooperation has evolved, and also a very important element, the bipartisan support in this cooperation. So for Cyprus, which is a rather small country in the region, which is a neighborhood which is neither boring nor calm. So we have, as Cyprus, an existential stake in promoting a regional rules-based order which generates stability and predictability through cooperation. It's part of our historical DNA, our survival kit, I should say, to try and build bridges and cooperation. That's why we actively promoted the trilateral cooperation. You referred before to Israel, Egypt, to Lebanon, Egypt. I would just remind you that there are a number of these kind of cooperations, and also plans on which are being pursued right now in order even to enlarge these cooperations. We have actively promoted them. It started with energy. When, as far as Cyprus was concerned, when we had, and it was referred before by Mr. Dokos, when we finished the delimitation of the agreement on the delimitation of our exclusive economic zones with Israel, same also with Egypt. We started trying to see how best we could create an environment that would allow us to exploit in the best possible way these natural resources. Perhaps it's a little bit far-fetched we also thought of these natural resources of energy as a kind of equivalent of steel in the post-war, post-Second World War period, which was at the origin of this adventure we call European Union, of which both Greece and Cyprus are members. So that's why we actively promoted these cooperations. Needless to say, it was referred before on positive agendas. These are cooperations which are not directed against countries, and with the aim of releasing the potential of the region in fields of common interest. As I said, it started with energy, but according to the wishes and needs of each country, it developed on a variable geometry. With Israel, it's one of the most developed: security, cyber security, tourism, health cooperation in the field of health, and so on and so on. So open agendas and positive agendas, aiming at creating, at releasing the potential of the region in all fields. Our vision, and it was referred before by Mr. Dokos again, is for these cooperations to bring about a paradigm shift, ultimately embracing the whole region. What was said, the lack of a security and cooperation architecture in the region is an important element, and we believe that the potential is there. So the participation of the United States in 2019 in this trilateral was extremely important. We have the alignment of 4 democracies with a stake of promoting cooperation in order to enhance regional peace and security, which is greatly important. The United States participation brings increased value to this endeavor because it allows us to enhance as Cyprus and Greece and Israel our reach. I was very pleased to participate in this movement. Since I was posted here, both in the United States Congress, which adopted the Eastern Mediterranean Security and Energy Partnership Act on a bipartisan base and fully endorsed this strategy, which has the potential of developing into an Eastern Mediterranean strategy. So on the practical level, of course, the participation of the because you have to take into account that, and it's important for all the problematic issues you raised, is that this is a projects-based cooperation. So we have the geostrategic level, but we have also the project-based cooperation in areas which are relevant to all of us. Thus, the United States brings expertise and experience, which greatly enhances our capacity in areas such as energy exploration, but also, and we are now actively engaged in this on the issues of renewable energies, innovation, economic cooperation, and something which I believe will be very important for the region in the next couple of years, the post-COVID, tackling with the challenges of the post-COVID situation. So in conclusion, yes, the participation of the United States in this trilateral cooperation, the 3+1, brings increased added value on both the geostrategic and the projects level. It demonstrates the commitment on the geopolitical level regarding its active involvement in the region. And don't forget that a lot of the problems in the region rose out of a perception, I don't say a reality, but the perceptions are enough, of an eventual withdrawal of the United States from the region, which other actors exploited in order to fill eventual gaps. So it demonstrates this commitment as far as we are concerned, and it brings also valuable expertise on concrete projects. For Cyprus as well, it has also provided a boost in the development of our bilateral relations with the United States. So thank you, Alexia.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Definitely, we all agree that Cyprus is an active country, a very active country, and is a country that promotes positive cooperations with other countries. One of them is Israel. So that allows me to move on to the next speaker, to the Israeli representative, Mr. Stein, to ask him what's the Israeli point of view, Israeli strategy regarding the Eastern Mediterranean region and regarding this initiative of the 3+1 agreement.
Thank you, Alexia, and thank the Marshall Fund for inviting me and for hosting that event, which, as I understand, is the concluding one of a week-long of other activities that probably help to highlight many of the subjects that have already been touched upon. Let me preface my remark by saying that I am here in my private capacity, and I speak only for myself and for no one else. It is in the nature of things that when you are the last speaker, it can easily say that everything has already been said, but not by everyone. And so I will not repeat because I do share the opinion expressed by previous speakers. I found very helpful the chronology provided by Mr. Dokos at the beginning that has set the stage for, I guess, our discussion. As to the 3+1 and the value, I will make, if you allow me, trying to put that in a kind of a context as far as Israel is concerned, and get you back to the beginning of the state of Israel in 48, encircled by a first circle of hostile countries that have rejected Israel's existential well-being. And in that context, our first prime minister has then turned to the so-called second circle and developed what he has coined as the periphery strategy, namely reaching out to the second circle of states with whom we might have strategic cooperations. Those three states were two of them Muslims but non-Arabs, and one was a Christian one. I have in mind Turkey, Iran, and the Ethiopian. Well, I don't have to tell you where our state of relations are currently with Turkey, but even more so with Iran, though with Ethiopian, we have had ups and downs. That first circle was broken during the 90s, during the when we have reached a peace agreement with Egypt and later with Jordan. And if I do a kind of a fast forward, we have last year broadened the circle of agreements, though reaching out to the Gulf and there signing agreements with the Arab UAE and with Bahrain. So Israel's originally strategy was to broaden the circle of allies, friends in the region. And when I say the region, is reaching out beyond the first circle also to the Mediterranean. And I think that Mr. Dokos has already described how events have unfolded since 2010. But even earlier, I would remind us of certain initiative conducted by the European Union, the famous Barcelona process, launched in 1995, which also had the objective of bringing the countries around the Mediterranean, the EU members and the non-EU members together around quite an ambitious agenda, which unfortunately 25 years later has not achieved that much, and I can regret it. The Barcelona was then superseded by the Union of Mediterranean. Be it as it may, I think that the fact that we have now the 3+1, but in addition, we have also some other forums in the Mediterranean, not to speak about the EMG, the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum, and some others, altogether reflect growing convergence of interest. And let's be clear about it. I guess that the discovery of gas and the Turkey challenge is kind of a point of convergence for both Greece, Turkey, and Israel. That reflects the current circumstances. That may also change, but we don't know. As to the 3+1, namely to the US, which came into that equation, I think that for many in the region, it's quite an encouraging sign. And let's face it, I guess during the Trump administration and still at the early beginning of Biden, there was a kind of a concern, which is still in the region, about whether the US is going to withdraw from the region. And I don't know yet how the US strategy vis-a-vis the Middle East will take shape. I've heard now that there is already a kind of a strategy of the US with respect to the Mediterranean, which I am not fully unaware, but the fact that the US has decided to join the 3+1 is a very positive sign. That is to say that the US continues to have a stake in the region and an interest in continuing and being part of such a regional gathering. So I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your remarks. Now that since the first round of your introductory remarks is over, I'm pleased to say that we have a lot of questions from the audience to all of you. Few of them regard Turkey. So this gives me an opportunity to move on to Mr. Dokos and ask him one of these questions, since he has written a lot of articles regarding Turkey's role in Eastern Mediterranean. One of these questions is there not a fear that isolating or containing Turkey or Russia or China could result in unpredicted and dangerous militarized actions? How does the 3+1 initiative may prevent one country such as Turkey or any other country who doesn't respect international law from dangerous and militarized actions?
Well, this is a good question from an old friend, Dr. Marzan from National Defense University. We had this discussion, I think, about 10 years ago. The problem is one looks at the Turkish narrative on that question, and I think Turkey has the sequence of events wrong. It complains about being isolated by these cooperation schemes between Greece, Israel, Egypt, and so on and so forth. Well, that's not how things happened. I mean, one of the reasons these countries came together in the first place was as a response to Turkey's aggressive rhetoric and policies. And what I usually say to my Turkish friends, you don't have an ambassador in Cairo. You don't have a full ambassador with Israel. You don't recognize the Republic of Cyprus. If Greece is your closest friend or the closest to a country having normal relations in the region, then that means something is very wrong with Turkish diplomacy. I mentioned at the end of my comments that this should be an open-ended architecture. And of course I had Turkey in mind, but there are some prerequisites. I do believe that Russia should, at the end of the day, be very close to NATO as we started in the 90s. Would that be possible under the circumstances? Wouldn't we expect Russia to make a few changes in its policies before there is a new kind of relationship with NATO and the West? In the same way, again, this should be an open-ended architecture provided interested parties do abide by a certain code of conduct. And that applies to Turkey, among other countries.
Okay,
Alexia, may I make a point?
Yes, Mr. Stein, yes.
I wanted to address myself to Mr. Dokos' objective at the outset to turn the Mediterranean into an arc of stability, where he also defines the borders. It's like from the Atlantic to Vladivostok, namely a very wide region. Mind you, that the Mediterranean is not clearly defined as a region. I mean, and it has never been defined, to the best of my recollection. For example, as somebody who have dealt with arms control for many years, the Mediterranean is not a region. So when you speak about an arc of stability which expands from the north to far of the Gulf, you encompass a lot of problems into what you would like to achieve at the end. So I think that it would be better to even here, if you have such an ambitious objective, to move in a kind of a gradual and incremental way, trying first of all to reach within the Mediterranean an area of peace and stability, which is at this stage not a given, and then move on to integrate countries as far as the Gulf state. I was thinking, and finally, I was thinking about a kind of a CSCE process for the Mediterranean, where a group of interesting countries, which would perhaps be a core group, which would simply sit down and define, where do we want to go? What should be the, as you said, the code of conduct, the rules of the game, the guidelines that will guide us as we go along in trying to achieve the ambitious project that you have outlined.
Mr. Pyatt, I don't know if you want to comment on the previous speakers. Otherwise, I have a question to you about China, since you mentioned China in your first remarks. So I would like to ask you a bit more about China's investments in the Mediterranean and what makes the 3+1 initiative relevant in this context, and what's your country's approach to China?
Thank you, Alexia. And I think I can unite the very good points that Ambassador Stein and Thanos made with your question.
Okay.
So a lot of this is about what Thanos called codes of conduct, what Ambassador Stein called the rules of the game, what the Biden-Harris administration has called the rules-based international order. I think it's very important to understand where the United States is on China today. The strong view of my government that one of the major global challenges we face is how to encourage China to play by the rules of that rules-based international order in a way that builds prosperity and peace for all of us. There's also a huge priority, as you've heard from President Biden, on working together with our European allies on all of these issues. In fact, our new Deputy Secretary of State, my friend Wendy Sherman, was in Brussels just yesterday for the first senior level dialogue between the United States and the European Union on China. And there's an excellent joint statement which the EAS and the State Department issued explaining how we view these issues together. So I think it's very much in the spirit of what we are doing with the 3+1 process, where again, you have three countries that have strongly demonstrated their commitment to these rules and their views that principles like international law and common understanding on those principles basis for building greater prosperity and moving our countries forward. I should also mention it just very briefly. I very much appreciated Ambassador Stein's reference to the East Med Gas Forum. And I will say, I'm puzzled to hear Ambassador Lysiotis and Ambassador Stein talk about American disengagement from the Eastern Mediterranean, because it doesn't feel like that to me. And because these are issues that I have lived and breathed every hour of the day for 5 years now. But I recognize the concern. I hear the concern here sometimes as well. But I think the fact that the United States has associated ourselves with all of these different institutional configurations, including now our status as an observer at the East Med Gas Forum, demonstrates that we're taking the region more seriously. As Ambassador Stein said, we actually have a strategy. And as I said in my opening remarks, this is a strategic choice that the US government has made on a bipartisan basis to think about the Eastern Mediterranean as a coherent space, and to think about how we work together with our democratic friends and allies to advance our shared interests.
Thank you, Mr. Pyatt. Mr. Lysiotis, what's your point of view and how Cyprus is trying to minimize any negative effect of the cooperation of other countries wider in the area?
Thank you very much. I mean, the best way, I believe that the best way to defend oneself, I mean, the best way for a country to defend itself from or to shore up its defenses is through building resilience. Through building resilience and through cooperation with its neighbors. I mean, you know, Cyprus is a European Union member state, so a large part of our policy I mean, is defined concerning important issues is defined with our participation at the level of the European Union. So already we have an element, a safeguard for us there. We are members of a bigger family. So, but at the same time, and I wanted to go back to the previous discussion, the mention of the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum and the strategy, because I think it exemplifies in a way how we build resilience and how we help and assist ourselves and our neighbors in putting up, I mean, in moving forward. The energy cooperation in the Eastern Mediterranean, it has, first of all, a number of technical characteristics which depend on geology, the finds, and so on. And we realized from the very beginning that the optimum exploitation of these resources can only be achieved through the cooperation of these countries. So we started the cooperation with Egypt and Israel. Energy was at the center initially before it expanded, and with other actors in the region. We have a trilateral cooperation with Jordan, for example. We have a trilateral cooperation with Lebanon. We have a trilateral cooperation with and we try to expand this. So it's not by chance that these countries found themselves in the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum. What's the effect of this? I mean, what would be the effect also of the exploitation of these resources? The first and most important element beyond the obvious, the prosperity of the region and so on, is reinforcing and enhancing the energy security of Europe. So isn't this a way of a positive way of contributing to pursuing our overall strategic objectives? I think, yes, it's an answer. And I believe that positive cooperations are the best answer to all efforts to undermine this situation. We have every reason, incentive to proceed in this field. Now, going back because I find this, we are now, just it's an element, we are now in the process of setting up a secretariat for the trilateral cooperation, for all of them. It will not be a joint secretariat, but it will be a secretariat which will coordinate and so on, each and every one of these. So imagine if at a certain stage the conditions are there in order to merge all these elements. In such a case, we will have, in a way, the embryo of structure of cooperation for the whole region, overall, like we had with the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum. So that these are the elements I wanted to put to you. So the question is not choosing, disputing, and so on. The question is building back better.
Building back better. It's a very good motto. It's a very good phrase for Cyprus. Thank you. Mr. Dokos, we have a very interesting question from Mr. Panagiotis Tsakonas that maybe you'd like to answer. How can the 3+1 initiative be linked with other cooperative multilateral fora or initiatives in the Eastern Mediterranean, most notably the East Med Gas Forum? What's your analysis on that? Can we be linked? Can this initiative be linked with other fora?
Just a quick response to Ambassador Stein. I'm an old Barcelona process diehard, and I regret its demise, and I feel continuously the need for replacement. And I take your point. There's nothing wrong about thinking big, but one has to be pragmatic. And when it comes to regional initiatives such as the one we're discussing today, one can perhaps use the analogy of the EU, despite the significant differences. The EU has been at various points faced with the dilemma: deepen or enlarge. And if I understand correctly, the mood of many of my European counterparts and many officials and scholars, given the choice again, they would rather choose deepening rather than enlargement, but that's a different story. On the question, I think we need a more dense network of initiatives and partnerships and cooperation schemes in the Mediterranean. And of course, since energy is usually, not always, unfortunately, is usually a win-win situation. And apparently there are deposits to be exploited in various parts of the Eastern Med. This is the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum is a natural evolution, and it nicely complements with the cooperation in the context of the trilateral. So this is something positive, and we need to create as many similar initiatives in the region as possible.
Alexia.
Yes. Yes.
Can I turn to to Ambassador Lysiotis, because he mentioned the fact that the Cypriots are now in the process of discussing setting up a kind of a secretariat or secretariats in plural, which will kind of organize. The question is, what came up to my mind, are we already at a stage, because of the myriad of forums that we have, to kind of institutionalize and have a structure in mind with an umbrella under which we will have different initiatives? So have we already reached the stage where we want to consider institutionalizing the entire process that is taking place?
Well, I mean, it depends on how you, if I may, on how you look at things. What I was referring, it's something very modest. It's something very modest, and it sprang out from necessity. We have as I said before, the trilateral cooperations, they include a host of issues. They are project-based and so on. So in the same way as we now try to proceed in the 3+1 cooperation, that is defining areas, working groups, and things like that, it's the same thing in the trilateral cooperation. So we need to bring also some coherence and define jointly common projects and so on. Don't forget, they are practical cooperations. So yes, the Secretariat responds to a practical need. It's not one should not think that we are creating already a conference on security and cooperation in Europe or anything else. It responds to a practical need, and it also depends on the ambition of those who participate. The Secretariat is not being done in the abstract. So what's important is that through these cooperations, as Mr. Dokos said before, we weave a network of relationships and cooperations. I'll give you an example. It was discussed through the trilateral. We have reached the point where we have agreed on Euro-Asia interconnector. Which will link the electricity grids of Cyprus, Greece, and Israel. This is a tangible result which comes out. We are also now discussing, in particular with the United States, for the setting up of an Eastern Mediterranean energy center. It was an element that was included in the Eastern Mediterranean Security and Energy Partnership Act, approved by Congress. So this is another element where some countries might cooperate. So it's not premature, because what we are doing is responding to needs, but behind this response to specific needs, we have a vision for the region, and so we will pursue this, and when the situation is right, perhaps the people concerned, like in the case of the EMGF, we can move forward in setting up. We might do something quite different. The Secretariat is a specific issue which responds to a specific need, but which has the potential of developing into something else if the parties and if the conditions are right. I hope I gave some elements of response.
I don't know if Mr. Stein, if you are satisfied with his answer, if you want to add anything on what Mr. Lysiotis said to you.
No, I get his point, but I still ask myself, have we already reached the stage where the core group can define the long-term objectives, which Mr. Dokos has also at the beginning articulated, also in thinking about an architecture. It doesn't prevent us from articulating rather ambitious ideas and moving towards a realization of them in a very gradual manner. And I've only made that comment because it seems, as I was doing my homework before the panel and looking at any number of forums that are already there, and the question is whether we should have a kind of a coordinating steering committee or something like that, or simply leave it as is, because the word ripeness has already been mentioned once. Perhaps we are not as ripe in the process of convergence in the region that we should think about structures. I don't know, Mr. Dokos, if you have an idea on that.
Before we move to Mr. Dokos, I would like to have a question to Mr. Pyatt, since we have our good friend Katerina Sokou, who has a question to you. What are the goals and timeline of future cooperation within the East Med Gas Forum, given the ambitious energy transition and green recovery goals that both the US and the EU have set for themselves? That's the question for you, Mr. Pyatt, from our good friend Katerina Sokou.
Good, thank you. Well, I would expect nothing less from Katerina. I would answer that in two ways or three ways. First of all, it's for the countries of the region to decide. The 3+1 is a process in which the United States is clearly the +1. So we follow the leadership and the initiative of the three organizing countries. That being said, we're very supportive of the conversations that are taking place on energy in that context. And we're particularly focused now on adding a sustainability and climate change element to that conversation. I actually think there are probably two dimensions of it. One is that Greece, Cyprus, and Israel are all countries significantly impacted by the downside adverse impacts of climate change, extreme weather events. We've seen that in Greece. We saw it just the other day with the terrible fires around Corinthos. So we all have a common stake in tackling this problem. We very much want to add to our 3+1 conversation, and have agreed to do so, an energy conversation that focuses on renewables, on clean energy technologies. Greece, Israel, and Cyprus all have different comparative advantages, especially in terms of wind and solar. This is actually attached to the question of electricity interconnection that Ambassador Lysiotis alluded to. Israel has lots of solar, but not so much wind. Greece has lots of both. And many of these phenomena are seasonal. So the ability to shuttle electric resources between and among the countries makes them also better positioned to work on renewables. That being said, it's very clear that gas is going to remain critically important to the energy mix in Europe and much of the world for several decades to come. I know Katerina saw our climate envoy, Secretary of State Kerry's very strong endorsement of the measures that Greece has taken to reduce its reliance on lignite coal power. The only way Greece is able to accomplish that ambitious agenda, which involves the phase out of lignite by 2025, which is really a model for all of the European Union. But the only way that Greece is able to meet that goal is by more extensive use of cleaner gas resources, and which is happening now in conjunction with Greek industry. I want to, on the industry point, I do want to just, while I have the floor for just a second, add one other wrinkle, and it's linked to Ambassador Stein's point about institutions. You know, a lot of this, our hope is that a lot of this begins to catalyze practical cooperation, not just debates. And so I was very excited in this regard to see the progress that occurred a few months ago when the AmChams in Israel, Greece, and Cyprus jointly signed a cooperation MOU agreeing to bring the private sectors, including the American private sector, of all three countries closer together. That's where the business opportunities are going to come from. And I have to, in this context, pay respects to my friend, David Harris from AJC, because David has been one of the real intellectual drivers of this concept. And he is passionately committed to the idea, as am I, that this should not just be limited to a narrow governmental conversation, but rather should be something that drives new dynamics of cooperation between the societies, and importantly, including the United States and our democracy.
Thank you, Mr. Pyatt. Mr. Dokos, I don't know if you want to have any comment on what Mr. Pyatt has said. Otherwise, to ask you, what do you think needs to be improved for this initiative in order to face external malign influences in the Eastern Mediterranean?
Let me add a couple of points on the question which also Henri Balki asked, because there is a discussion in the sense, should we fight over potential deposits since hydrocarbons will be phased out over the next 20, 30 years? I think it's an important question. And the answer is, if the destination is Europe, then obviously this is not an open-ended energy bonanza. We're not talking about the 90s when oil and gas would be used for the next 50 or 100 years. Now, especially when it comes to Europe, I think there's a time limit, perhaps the next 20 years, where gas will still be a bridge fuel, as we say. But in places like the Balkans or regional markets in the Middle East, I think the transition to green energy will take much longer. So in that sense, energy cooperation in the Eastern Med and forums like the fora, like the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum, will continue to be important. And also to Ambassador Stein's question on institutions. Again, as I said before, there's nothing wrong with having ambitious goals, but then take small and measured steps. And since we have multiple initiatives and partnerships in a trilateral format, Greece, Cyprus and Israel, Greece, Cyprus and Egypt, then Lebanon, Jordan, the UAE, the Saudis, even India could come on board at some point. And of course, the US being the plus one in some of them, and also other powers like France having demonstrated an interest in such initiatives. Having small secretariats could be helpful in coordinating some of those activities. So my answer is, I think we are ready for that small step forward.
Mr. Stein, energy is a very important tool for Israel. How do you see Israel's strategy regarding energy in Eastern Mediterranean?
Well, as you said, I mean, the two triggers for the cooperation between Israel, Cyprus, Greece, and not to forget Egypt, which is also for Israel a critical element in that equation, is of utmost importance. First of all, in terms of energy sufficiency in Israel itself. I guess in referring to what Mr. Dokos said, speaking long term, we are at the phase where there are two objectives in terms of the cooperation. First of all, the discovery and the drilling, and the second one is the export. And then we are into questions, how do you then export the amount of gas from the Mediterranean to other markets? And there are two ways. One is through an LNG, which is in Egypt, and the other one is through a pipeline which goes from Israel to Cyprus, to Greece, and then to Italy. Now, I guess the feasibility studies about the second option of the pipeline are quite, shows that there are some difficulties. Now, given the glut in the gas market, there are some questions which all of us have to ask. But nevertheless, as Mr. Dokos has said, I mean, we will still have to deal with a demand of gas for at least 2 or 3 decades, depends which region of the country. But energy is one element, one leg. And the first one, which is quite important in the regional cooperation. It should not be the only one. And I guess it should not only be the second one, which is the challenge that Turkey posed to Greece, Cyprus, and Israel. And I guess we have, and Mr. Dokos again has referred to it as Ambassador Lysiotis, that we have in those 10 years come a very long way to identify additional areas of cooperation which will bring us actually forward, not only in the security realm, which is quite important for Israel, and Ambassador Lysiotis has already also referred to it in his remarks. So yes, gas remains a critical element of cooperation, with some question mark about the supply from the region, out of the region into other markets. But that is clearly not the only pillar on which the cooperation between the two countries will have to be based.
Right. What do you think, Mr. Lysiotis, how energy is playing a role in Cyprus as a geopolitical tool, energy cooperation?
There are two elements. First of all, I fully agree with the points made both by Ambassador Pyatt and by Mr. Stein concerning the continued relevance of natural gas in the energy mix of countries. I mean, just to give you an example, Cyprus now is wholly dependent with this, I mean, with the exception of some a very limited element of aeolian and solar power on, in particular for electricity generation, on fossil fuels. It would signify an important step forward in meeting our commitments if we could use natural gas. And we're trying now to implement solutions in this respect. So natural gas will remain there as a bridging fuel for some time, both for us and for the region, I believe. But more particularly in the region. Then what was said before, I mean, and that was a drive behind our cooperation with Israel. If we want to exploit these resources in the optimum, we have to find ways to take them to the market, and to take, I mean, and to bring them to the market in a way that makes commercial sense. We will have now, I mean, in the end, it's the market who will evaluate the different projects, but there are some the East Med pipeline was referred before, but we can eventually find other flexible ways of reaching the markets, because we can also reach Asian markets, which are very, which will remain. So, and a third point, which I wanted to make earlier, in full agreement with Ambassador Pyatt, and that's why I made it a point of, in a way, distinguishing between the geopolitical trend and the projects trend. I mean, the projects component of all this. Yes, the projects component is very important, and we are moving very concretely in this respect, including in the issues of renewables, climate change, desertification, innovation and technology, bringing actors together. Like, I mean, reference was made to AmCham, the three chambers meeting together. We are trying to create the same conditions for research institutes working together and so on. And that's also the aim of the Eastern Mediterranean Energy Forum, which was included in the legislation by Congress, which also provides both for educational institutions, research institutes, and the private sector to be involved. These are practical negotiations. If I may, I don't know whether we have a lot of time, not me, but together. If I may, I would just wanted to add something
Yes.
On Turkey. We haven't excluded Turkey from any cooperation. It's Turkey that excludes itself for this cooperation. We cannot change the rules of the game, because these are rules of the game by which we all abide. And in particular, for example, in the case of energy, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, we cannot create ad hoc situations for a country to participate. But we don't exclude Turkey from any cooperation, provided it abides by the rules. Thank you.
We all agree on that remark. Thank you very much, Mr. Lysiotis. Now we have only 5 to 10 minutes before I give the floor to Mr. Lesser for his conclusion. I have Mr. Pyatt. I have a question from the audience regarding this administration, because the agreement was signed by the previous US administration. And the question is, do you think it will remain in effect under Biden-Harris administration? And I would like the opinion of the other speakers too on that.
Alexia, I'm absolutely certain that that has been made clear at the highest levels by Secretary of State Blinken through his conversations with Foreign Minister Dendias and the public statements of the State Department. But equally important is President Biden himself, someone who knows this region well, who has been deeply involved in Hellenic issues. In fact, I think I've shared in the past that on one of the last days in office that Vice President Biden had, he had a series of phone calls which were focused on what was then the run-up to Crans-Montana and the work that the United States was doing with Greece and Cyprus and others in that regard. So I have no doubt at all, and I think, in fact, what you've heard directly from President Biden is that it's his ambition to raise our cooperation to an even higher level. That is his commitment and his instruction to me and to the rest of the team. And I'm proud that we're in fact already doing that across a broad range of issues, including our cooperation around the 3+1.
What do you think, Mr. Dokos? What about the Biden administration? What do you think his foreign policy will be in Eastern Mediterranean?
Well, obviously different and much more active, but we are still waiting to see exactly how different it is going to be. But let me say, as a long time observer of foreign policy, I can tell you that finding a domestic consensus and continuity on foreign policy questions, it's a rather rare phenomenon. And when you find it, you enjoy it as much as you can. So I very much agree with Ambassador Pyatt. This has been the case in the US. Both the Trump and the Biden administration seem to value that relationship and the US participation in 3+1. And also in the case of Greece, we have remarkable continuity on that question. So I take this as a very positive sign.
What about you, Mr. Stein? What do you think Biden administration foreign policy would be? We saw how he acted during the violence events in Israel last week.
You asked me quite an interesting, complicated, and a question that merits a panel in and of itself. I don't think that the Biden administration was very enthused about the need to invest some time in the Middle East. I think that the question was raised by Mr. Dokos, how different is the current Biden administration from the previous one, and I will go even further and say how different is the Biden administration different from the Obama administration, which is kind of a yardstick to see whether there is some continuity between Obama and Biden. And I guess the first signs are that there is not, there is certain continuities, of course. I mean, there is an overall US retrenchment, given the fact that there are other priorities that the US has now to invest many more resources than it used to. But I think that the recent engagement and the visit yesterday and the day before of Secretary Blinken in the region only shows that even if the US wants to leave the region, it can't, because there are a lot of interests at stake for the US, not only regionally, but beyond that. And one has to see also that, anyway, I think that the US remains, and I don't have to underscore how, repeat how critical and key is the US-American alliance for Israel, was, is, and will hopefully will stay so for the distant future. Therefore, the presence of the US is critical, be it in the Mediterranean or in the Middle East. Whether it will stay so, given the fact that most of the resources of the current administration will go into addressing domestic issues, the post-pandemic, the revival of the economy, and then facing the enormous Chinese challenge, not to speak in our region about a minor challenge, and that is the Russian one, which remains still also a problem for the US. So altogether, I can only hope that the US, as Ambassador Pyatt has underscored, will continue to remain engaged within the 3+1 and beyond that.
Right. What about you, Mr. Lysiotis?
Well, I fully agree with the reasoning of Ambassador Pyatt. I just wanted to add two elements. The first element is that this policy in the Eastern Mediterranean, the 3+1, has the full support, bipartisan support of Congress. So this is an element also which vouches for continuity, and from my feeling here, there is even eagerness on further deepening this cooperation. Secondly, at the time when the Biden administration is publicly trying to align American interests and values, the fact that you have in the 3+1 cooperation, 4 democracies taking a leading role in shaping the cooperation in the region, I believe that also gives a message in this respect, and I'm sure that this involvement, there might be realignments, as people say here, but the interest will remain. As Shimon Stein said a moment ago, you know, in foreign policy, sometimes crises come and find you, problems come and find you, even if you want. So yes, the Eastern Mediterranean is a region where the United States has to invest diplomatically and otherwise, and in order to also meet the global challenge, I mean, even within the context of the great power competition. Because, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lysiotis. Now, we have only a few minutes left, so I think it's better now to give the floor to Mr. Ian Lesser to conclude what we all heard today in this wonderful afternoon, and to bring together the remarks from the United States, from Greece, from Israel, and from Cyprus. Mr. Lesser, the floor is yours.
Alexia, thank you very, very much indeed. And you've set me a challenge, which in fact, I am not going to meet, because I maybe can conclude, but it won't really be a conclusion in that sense. But let me just say a couple of things. I mean, first of all, you know, what comes out, I think, very clearly from this conversation is that looking at the Eastern Mediterranean today and the space, the geopolitical space of the 3+1 initiative, you know, there are a lot of developmental opportunities. We talked about a lot of those. There are also a lot of risks. And so in this effort, you know, in a sense, you have an opportunity to balance these two things, hopefully more on the former than on the latter, but clearly there's going to be a need for the latter. There's no question about that. There's a need for risk reduction. There's a need for greater stability, because without that, the ability to take advantage of all of these economic opportunities is going to be more limited. I mean, we didn't even really talk too much about the tourism side of this, but it's a very interesting example. In fact, the regional value of tourism, which is enormous, it's probably bigger than the energy economy. I leave to the experts to say whether I'm correct or not, but I suspect it is, and that is obviously very exposed to risk. So many things that this initiative can contribute. There was, secondly, a lot of conversation about the US role, and Ambassador Pyatt spoke to this very eloquently. Let me just say on this question, my own perception on this question of American engagement, disengagement, I don't see the disengagement. I think there is a kind of mythology about this. I understand why there would be concerns about it and why the questions are raised. But in terms of the reality of what the US is doing politically, in security terms, in economic terms, in cultural terms, I just don't see that disengagement. And I can say, beyond that, just in a smaller way from the GMF side, we certainly in our work intend to pay a lot of attention to this region in the future, to our partnerships in the region. We think they're very important. And that maybe leads me to my last point, which is to thank, first of all, our partners in this. I mentioned a lot of them to begin with, but let me come back perhaps and mention just two in particular, given our setting today, virtually at least in Greece, and that is to say the Alexander Filon Fund for Transatlantic Partnership, but also our partnership with the US Embassy in Athens around this event and many other things. We're really very grateful for that, and to all our partners again. Very grateful for this conversation, which was incredibly open, incredibly lively. And to all of our speakers, thank you for being with us. Alexia, thank you for doing such a wonderful job moderating.
So next time to be in person, you should come in Greece and do it in.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is definitely our intention, and we'll figure out how to do that for sure. But I mean, it just underscores again that this was not only an excellent conversation on substance, but it was also a conversation among friends. And that's very much what we intended, and I think that's what we had. A final word of thanks to my own colleagues on the GMF side, to Laura Bassani, to Christina Kausch, to Alberto Tagliapietra, and to John Alexander. These things don't happen by accident. People put them together and make them happen, and I'm most grateful to all of my colleagues. And to all of you who joined us today, and there were many of you, and to all who asked questions, thanks so much. Thanks for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you all again at GMF soon, hopefully in person, but at least virtually.
Thank
Goodbye
you.
from Brussels.
Thank you.